Last video for this unit, Ecology 1, this is Unit 2. We're doing B11A. Take a minute, pause this, set up your notes in your spiral. Yes, you need to have a spiral just for biology. Deal with that. B11A says you're going to summarize the role of microorganisms in both maintaining and disrupting the health of the ecosystems. We'll get to the organisms later, so we'll do that a little bit later in the year, but right now we're going to focus on maintaining and disrupting the ecosystem. So how do microorganisms affect the ecosystem? Microorganisms are simply microscopic organisms. Anything that you have to use a microscope in order to see, any living thing that you have to use a microscope in order to see is going to be considered a microscopic organism. Examples could be bacteria, protists, fungi, algae. Our microscopes at school here are really great, but even they struggle with seeing bacteria. Really, when you look at bacteria through our microscopes, they just don't look like a whole lot. But we have great microscopes for seeing the protists and the fungi and the algae. So there are lots of these organisms that we can look at and see. Okay, so how do they help in maintaining the environment? First and foremost, and we talked about these, we have nitrogen-fixing bacteria. We couldn't survive without these. There's some nitrogen that's changed to nitrates when lightning strikes, but the vast majority of nitrogen gas is converted into solid form with these nitrogen-fixing bacteria. These bacteria are able to take in nitrogen gas from the atmosphere and convert it to a form that's usable by plants. And once the plants have it, then we animals can get to it too. Typically, it's in the form of a nitrate or a nitrite. So again, they take this gaseous nitrogen and they convert it to a solid or liquid form in some kind of nitrogen compound. And that shouldn't be too alien to you guys, because you know that hydrogen is normally a gas and oxygen is normally a gas. But when you get them together in a compound, they form water, which is a liquid at normal atmospheric temperatures, like we're talking room temperature here. So converting something from a gas into a solid or a liquid just by combining it chemically with something is not something that's abnormal or new to you guys. Remember, okay, I'm talking about decomposers. Again, decomposers break down dead organic material to be recycled. Again, bacteria and protists are doing that. So we have nitrogen-fixing bacteria, which are essential to the environment. We have decomposers, which are essential to the environment. If you think about what it'd be like if you didn't have decomposers around. You see that dead animal on the side of the road, and you know, a year later it's still there. That's not so good. Okay, so I'm going to backtrack a minute. These are the two big ones. It's not the only. If you think about algae, they're going to carry on photosynthesis. A lot of protists carry on photosynthesis, so it just depends on what you're talking about. I just hit two of the big dogs right here. Those are the two most important ones that we'll talk about in this class. Disrupting the environment, they can also disrupt. And the number one thing you guys should think about, the number one thing that you guys probably think about would be causing disease. But before we get to that, I'm going to talk about something that I just did with the nitrogen. And that's causing toxic algae blooms. And the toxic algae blooms, again, it's when you have this population boom in an algae and they produce these poisons. That's just one of their natural things that they do. And when they do this, in many cases, it's a normal cycle, but sometimes it can cause, if we're out of balance here, we can cause these to happen. So sometimes these are good, I mean, this is natural, not necessarily good, but sometimes they're natural. Sometimes we humans step in and cause this. But no matter what, this is disrupting whatever environment we have for a while. It's going to have an impact on our environment here. But the one we really think about is the one where we talk about things like diseases, where we say, oh my gosh, and I didn't even write that in there, did I? We talk about diseases. Most issues are with populations, and I'm going to put the word disease right here. And it's not just one individual organism getting the disease. That's not what's affecting the environment. It's when a disease runs through a population. So, for example, a few years ago, jackrabbit population was really decimated in this area, and there was some disease that ran through the population. Well, when you had a huge lack of jackrabbits, you had a really negative impact on the coyote population, but you had a positive impact on the cottontails around here because they weren't competing for food between those two. So it impacted the environment. In some ways you might think, oh yeah, I like cottontail rabbits, they're great, but not in other ways. So it's not that one organism gets a disease, it's that a disease can run through a population. That's what impacts the environment. We'll talk about how the microorganisms impact individual organisms as opposed to the whole ecosystem later on in the school year. So these are the two big things we talk about. Maintaining, we have the nitrogen-fixing bacteria, the decomposers. There are others, but these are the most important ones. Disrupting the health of the ecosystem, toxic algae blooms, and then diseases that run through a population. So those are the big dogs here.